This is James Walker, and welcome to Real Talk, Real People. This is the podcast that turns the mic over to everyday people to hear what they have to say about the issues and problems we face as a society. Hello, folks. Thank you very much for joining us again this week. You know, I thought COVID-19 had shown us the worst it could bring, but obviously, I was wrong. Folks, this virus is raging stronger than ever before, and the death tolls are at unprecedented levels here in the United States. If you've been keeping up with the news, you know that as of last Friday, the U.S. is averaging 247,200 new cases a day and 2,982 deaths per day. Those are blow your mind stats, so it is clear that this thing isn't over. The vaccine is here, but now we're faced with another problem. Many people are paranoid and believe the vaccine was politically pushed through, and they have adopted a wait-and-see attitude to find out just how the vaccine affects other people. And that includes a lot of healthcare workers, folks. If you, again, have been keeping up, then you know that in some hospitals and in some nursing homes, healthcare workers up to 80% have decided that they are not going to take this vaccine. So this is really a major problem. And I admit that I am one of those who is not going to take this vaccine unless it becomes absolutely necessary. And for those of you who want to know why, you should read my column that's called Vaccine. Sorry, I have to say no. And if you click on columns on our website, you can read that column and my thoughts about this coming vaccine, or I should say, the vaccine that is now here. But whether you agree or disagree with taking it, you should understand the pros and cons. And for that, we go back to a conversation with Gary Spinner of the Southwest Community Health Center in Bridgeport.
I am an HIV specialist. I have spent my entire career over the last 37 years taking care of people with HIV. I've worked in community health centers 25 years in New Haven and the past 11 years in Bridgeport. And I currently have about 450 people with HIV whose care I manage. I also take care of and treat people with hepatitis C and spend a lot of time, and actually am a national speaker on HIV prevention. We've got interventions, something called PrEP, which is pre-exposure prophylaxis, and we can prevent HIV. And so I spend a lot of time working on HIV prevention. The other thing I'll just point out is that because I've been caring for people with HIV my entire career, HIV disproportionately affects people of color. Blacks and Latinx populations are, grossly overrepresented in the population of people with HIV. And now that we are in this pandemic, which is the second pandemic in my lifetime, HIV being the first pandemic, COVID-19 pandemic is also disproportionately impacting people of color. So that's a little bit about who I am and what I do. And I really care greatly about the fact that we have tremendous health inequity in our country, really just tremendous racial and ethnic disparities in healthcare outcomes between white people and people of color.
So, given that we have that health disparities, and for many minorities, that has played out in just everyday routine visits to doctors when access to health care um, is granted, so to speak, um, why is it unreasonable for Black Americans to assume that this vaccine should be, when it becomes available, is the right thing for them to take?
Well, I think that, first of all, let me say, and you certainly um, wrote about it in your column about um, bias in healthcare and experiences that you personally had um, being treated differently because of the color of your skin. And I think that that happens commonly throughout our country. It's very clear, and it's been documented time and again that there's bias in the delivery of our healthcare to people of color as compared to whites. But in answer to your question, um, first of all, there we need to guide our healthcare systems by what is really scientifically proven to be effective. Um, Early on in my career with HIV, um, many people had conspiracy theories the about HIV as a disease and that it was somehow created in a laboratory and it was a way to control, certain racial, ethnic, and sexual minorities. Um, but over time, people have realized we have tremendous therapeutic options now. People who are diagnosed with HIV, a 20-year-old will live a near normal life expectancy with the treatments we have. And that's because of scientific research, medical research. And in terms of the use of vaccines, um, it distresses me that there are lots of people who are anti-vaxxers who, will not vaccinate their kids. And we know without question that there are diseases that can be eradicated um, with vaccines. So when I was growing up, polio was a disease that was impacting many, many people, and a vaccine was developed. And we don't see polio in this country any longer. And polio, you know, now exists sporadically in countries where there has not been vaccines. Same thing with measles. Measles actually, it was thought would be eradicated in this country until there have been people who have chosen not to vaccinate their children. And so we have outbreaks of measles. And diseases like measles are not they're not benign. They can cause tremendous problems in people who get infected, including life-threatening problems. So we know that vaccines work. Um, Unfortunately, we have conspiracy theorists, and I believe that some of that even comes from the highest levels of our government, where people downplay science. The entire COVID-19 response in the United States, in my opinion, has been mismanaged because of it's been politicized, and the role of science and the role of research has really been minimized. And I think that the way we will get out of this pandemic in our country, and we happen to be one of the worst countries in the world in terms of our response, and really a complete lack of coordination um, to address this pandemic. That when a vaccine becomes available, and it looks like there's a number of promising candidates that are likely to show efficacy and safety and be approved, perhaps as early as the beginning of 2021, that is a way to help people develop immunity and help us end our way out of um, this nightmare that we are all living in right now.
Gary, I think for I can't speak for most people, but I can certainly speak for myself. My issue is not with the science. I trust the science. What I don't trust are, quite frankly, the drug companies. For instance, when you talk about polio, you talk about the success of polio, but you don't talk about all the people who polio vaccines did not work for, and all those who underwent the experimental treatments for that vaccine to work. Again, I understand the thing about the greater good and all of that, and I am not by any means suggesting that people should not take the vaccine if it when it becomes available. What I'm saying is that I'm not taking it, and I'm not taking it not based on what happened with the Tuskegee experiment and so forth. That was my father's era. That's not why I'm not taking it. I'm not taking it based on what is happening today and what has happened to me and my personal experience. And let's be fair, the courts are filled with drugs and other products that were okay. And we find out 20, 30 years later that they're not okay. So, that's where my thoughts are when we talk about this vaccine. And I'm not sure how you go about convincing people that we should think differently. You're listening to Real Talk, Real People, the podcast that turns the mic over to everyday people. We're back talking with Gary Spinner from the Southwest Community Health Center in Bridgeport. We're talking about whether blacks and other people of color should take the COVID-19 vaccine when it becomes available. There's a lot of hesitancy from blacks and other people of color due to the history that has taken place between the medical community and blacks. And yes, that does include some experimentations. We all know about them. And just on a day-to-day basis, it just doesn't seem that we get the same attention as our white counterparts. But Gary says, despite misgivings, we should trust the history of vaccines.
Well, you certainly raise a valid point about, long-term safety of any product that people take. Um, there have been products that have been approved by the FDA, and only over time do we learn about, adverse events that may take place. Vaccine safety, for the most part, is something that historically has been quite effective. In terms of COVID-19, I think that, I'm not so worried about the drug companies, kind of putting one over on the population. I really feel like, personally, that the scientific rigor of the process which goes on, and it's not that a drug company develops something and then they get to market it. It has to be reviewed, and there has to be clear and convincing data that the benefits outweigh any risks. And, are there risks with putting anything into your body? Sure. And I have no doubt when we have our COVID-19 vaccine, whatever, potential adverse effects there may be. And with most vaccines, I will say that the most common adverse event with most vaccines are injection site soreness, sometimes mild flu-like symptoms for 12 to 24 hours. But with vaccines in general, adverse events are really not common. And given where we are in the United States right now with this pandemic, the fact that we have a prospect to develop enough immunity in our population to have this pandemic eventually die out because there won't be enough people who are susceptible to it, a vaccine is really, will play the huge role in that process. I think one thing in our country that's different than some of the countries that have done a really formidable job in controlling COVID-19 is that we've lacked a national policy. Really, responsibility has been abdicated to the states. It's been politicized, from the White House on down, that somehow, if you're choosing to not wear a mask can be your patriotic right to your personal freedom, when other countries, you know, this is a public health crisis, and yeah, you put a damn mask on your face, and that prevents spread of aerosol and droplets that can infect other people, as well as it can offer yourself some protection. So we've lacked that leadership, but I do believe that if the process goes through without being politicized, um, what was scary to me is that Russia came out with a vaccine that didn't even go through clinical trials, and that really, is appalling because it's just this political process. But I think that we have enough, you know, good, intelligent, strong public health advocates and scientists who are watching the process, to the point that I really don't believe that anything will be approved unless um, it's it's been proven to have the rigor of the process to have something that's effective.
Well, when you talk about doctors, scientists, and so forth, you're talking about well-educated people. You're going to be dealing with a lot of people who aren't well educated, and they listen to politics. They do. They listen to the direction of politics and where politics is taking them, so to speak. So we're very, very divided right now. And in particular, one of the big questions is whether Black Americans will take part in experimental um, studies, I guess they call them, or trials, to determine if the vaccine will work for Black Americans as opposed to white Americans, Hispanic Americans, etc. Do you think that that is something that is needed in this particular with this particular virus?
Well, I think it's always needed, and I think that people of color in general, um, blacks, Latinx population, and women are always underrepresented in clinical trials across the board for every study and every medication. Um, so, do I think blacks will take place and will enroll in clinical trials? I really don't know. Um, I would hope so, because I would hope that we would have whatever information that can be gained, particularly because blacks are, have are impacted more greatly by COVID-19 than any ethnic and racial group. Blacks, Native Americans, and Latinx populations are being, infected and dying at rates that are 2 and 3 times higher than whites. So, given the greatest adverse impact on people of color from COVID-19, it would certainly be my hope that people of color would enroll in clinical trials. But
So,
what, go ahead.
so what is the medical community doing to see to it that that happens? I mean, if this is such a great problem in the Black community, what is the medical community doing to get that information out to the Black community and ensure the Black community that the information that the medical community is on is on their side? What do you do? I mean, because again, you're up against for many um, apathy toward the medical community. So what do you do, or what are you doing, I should say?
Well, I can't speak for the medical community, or in particular, I can't speak for what the um, pharmaceutical companies and what the National Institutes of Health in the vaccine trial with Moderna that they have been funding, what they're doing to recruit minorities. So I really don't know. Um, I can say that for me personally, as a clinician who takes care of patients, I have conversations about the importance of vaccinations with patients every day. And, especially right now, it's funny because the flu vaccine for 2021 just became available. And so I try to convince all of my patients to take the flu vaccine, especially in this time of COVID-19. Um, and people, understandably, have concerns. People get, people have heard things. People have, you know, heard somebody else say, well, I got the flu when I got a flu shot. So, I don't know how and what types of outreach the companies working on vaccine clinical trials are doing right now to enroll people of color. Um, I can only hope that's something that they see as important. I can also, understand if people of color, choose not to want to be in a clinical trial because, um, and you alluded to it in your piece uh, on how people of color have been experimented upon with the Tuskegee trial. So I can understand if people would not want to be participating in a clinical trial. On the other hand, I just hope that, especially given the adverse impact of COVID-19 on people of color, that they'll take advantage of the vaccine when it comes out. I know I certainly will as a healthcare provider because I get exposed to people um, on a not infrequent basis. I've had about 25 of my patients who have gotten COVID-19. Um, Two of them have passed away as a result. One was an African American woman, and another was a Latino man. Um, and I even had a 21-year-old. I have a 21-year-old patient right now who did nothing to, um, did not social distance, did not wear masks, and back in March, he got infected with COVID-19, and he spent almost 8 weeks hospitalized on a ventilator. And fortunately for him, he actually survived and is now um, out and about. And what kinds of long-term sequelae this may have on him and his health in his life, we really don't know. But he's not somebody who had any comorbid conditions. So, given how serious this pandemic is, it's just my hope that people will take advantage of a vaccine once one or more are approved.
And one final question is: does that hold true for parents? Are you recommending that parents vaccinate their children with
Yes.
the COVID-19 vaccine when it becomes available?
Well, I can't really speak to that because I really don't know what the guidance is going to be. Whether the vaccine trials are enrolling children, and whether then, if they are and it's found to be safe and efficacious, then absolutely. But I can't say that I have enough information to advocate. But I do say that, once the clinical trials are completed and based on data that gets generated, if indeed these vaccines have been found to be safe and effective in preventing COVID-19 in children, then absolutely.
You've been listening to Real Talk, Real People. If you would like to be on the show, have a comment about the show, or perhaps you have an idea that the show should explore, give us a call at 203-605-1859 or email us at realtalkrealpeoplect@gmail.com. And remember, start your Sundays with my column in Hearst, Connecticut newspapers statewide, and start your Mondays right here at Real Talk, Real People. Have a good week, folks. We'll talk again next week.